Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Imagine walking into a pitch-black, suffocatingly foul room, terrified that an unseen fiery entity might literally drag you to the underworld the moment you sit down. Today, we're diving into how the terrifying, visceral dangers of ancient Roman toilets birthed early religious beliefs in toilet demons and divine saviors. And we're going to see how looking at this through a modern, atheistic, and scientific lens reveals a pretty profound truth, which is that humans instinctively invent gods to explain the unseen physical horrors they just don't have the science to understand yet.
It really is just a fascinating collision of biology and theology. We're looking at a time where the boundary between the physical world and the supernatural it just didn't exist in the human mind.
Right.
So the latrine becomes this perfect microcosm to study how human beings process sheer random terror before the scientific method came along.
Exactly. We are tracking the origin of religious versus secular explanations for disease today based on some incredible source material, including the video Demons Are in Your Toilet by Religion for Breakfast. But before we step fully into that ancient Roman darkness, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. So to really grasp why people believed literal supernatural entities lived in their plumbing, we kind of have to put ourselves inside the minds and the physical reality of the people using these spaces.
Yeah, because the psychological landscape of late antiquity was just fundamentally different from ours. Today, if you hear a strange noise in the house, your brain assumes, oh, it's the wind or the house settling.
Yeah, you don't jump straight to ghosts.
Right. But in the ancient world, without a scientific framework to explain like thermodynamics or biology, the default assumption was supernatural. The world was heavily populated by unseen agents.
Unseen agents. I love that phrasing. And there's this incredibly vivid story that captures this exact mindset. It comes from a 5th century hagiography, so like a biography of a Christian saint called The Life and Miracles of Saint Thecla.
Oh, the Dexianus story.
Yes, the priest named Dexianus. So picture this. It's the dead of night. There's no electric lighting, just thick, pitch-black shadows. He goes to use the latrine, and while he's sitting there in total vulnerability, the text claims a demon raises itself up right in front of him, a, quote, demoniacal creature, savage and enraged.
And you have to remember the sheer vulnerability of that specific human moment.
Oh, for sure.
You're in a dark, confined space, you're usually isolated, and you're in a physical state where you cannot easily flee or defend yourself.
No, not at all. And the physical reaction Dexianus has is just catastrophic. He's so seized with absolute terror that he breaks into a cold sweat and begins convulsing. The spasms are so violent that he actually dislocates his own cervical vertebrae. He essentially breaks his own neck from thrashing around. And the text insists he's only saved from certain death by the miraculous intervention of Saint Thecla.
It's intense.
It is. And it really cements this early Christian doctrine that demons literally lurked in the toilets waiting to strike. I mean, they blamed these bathroom demons for everything from sudden headaches to marital problems.
Which honestly tells us so much about how the brain functions under extreme stress. The human brain is a pattern recognition machine at its core. It desperately needs cause and effect.
But wait, let's look at this objectively for a second, from a modern secular viewpoint. If a guy collapses in a bathroom today, we don't call an exorcist, right?
No, you call an ambulance.
Exactly. We check for a pulse. We look for signs of a stroke or a severe epileptic episode. So what was he actually experiencing? Was it a hallucination or just a desperate theological explanation for a very real medical emergency?
You're hitting on the exact mechanism of myth-making there. Because lacking a medical vocabulary, how do you explain a grand mal seizure?
You can't.
Right. A seizure is a sudden electrical disturbance in the brain. It makes a person thrash violently, lose consciousness, even sustain severe musculoskeletal injuries, exactly like dislocating a vertebrae.
Wow, yeah.
But Dexianus and the people writing his biography, they didn't know what a neurological electrical disturbance was. They only knew a healthy man walked into a dark, foul-smelling room and moments later was thrashing on the ground with a broken neck.
The brain demands an explanation for that.
It does. It assigns agency to random biological chaos, so the unseen threat has to be personified as a demon.
Okay, so if gods and demons weren't actually in the latrines, what was? Because archaeology strips away the supernatural stuff to reveal a deadly, naturalistic truth that perfectly explains these so-called demonic encounters.
It really does. Dr. Anne Koloski-Ostro, who is a prominent archaeologist, has done extensive work on this. She identified 21 ancient toilets in the ruins of Rome alone. Yeah, and when we analyze the physical construction of these latrines, they were From a modern engineering perspective, absolute death traps.
Right, because of the plumbing.
Mm.
Or the lack of it. Like, let's actually break down what a modern S-curve does,
Mm.
because we take it completely for granted today.
We really do.
When you sit on a modern toilet, there's a literal physical barrier between you and the city sewer. That little U shape of water in the bowl, the S-curve, uses gravity to hold a small pool of water in a dip. It creates an airtight liquid seal.
Mm.
So sewer gases physically cannot push past that water to enter your bathroom.
Yeah.
But the Romans had no concept of this, did they?
None whatsoever. Most of these public latrines were simply stone benches with holes positioned directly over massive internal cesspits.
Oh, gross.
And there was frequently zero outflow into a larger moving sewage system. It was just a straight, dark drop into an unventilated pit of accumulating human waste.
Which basically changes the environment from a simple bathroom into a literal chemical reactor.
Precisely. A cesspit of that scale acts as an anaerobic bioreactor. Anaerobic bacteria, meaning bacteria that thrive in environments without oxygen, begin breaking down the organic waste.
And that creates gas.
Massive quantities of byproducts, specifically hydrogen sulfide, which smells intensely of rotting eggs, and methane gas.
And methane is highly flammable. So if these latrines were unventilated drop chutes, that gas had nowhere to go but up. It would just pool and build pressure right beneath the stone benches.
Exactly.
Imagine walking into a pitch-black Roman latrine, holding an open flame like a flickering oil lamp or candle, just so you can see where to sit.
The scientific probability of ignition in that scenario is incredibly high. If a pocket of methane gas creeps up the chute and meets the open flame of an oil lamp, you get rapid combustion.
You'd literally have a pillar of fire erupting from the hole beneath you.
Yes.
Wait, think about this from the perspective of someone living in the year 200. You have zero concept of chemistry. You don't know what a gas is.
Oh.
You just know that a jet of roaring flame just shot out of the underworld to singe your flesh.
It's terrifying.
It's the ultimate God of the Gaps scenario, isn't it? Like plugging in a supernatural explanation for a terrifying natural phenomena.
It perfectly embodies that concept. The scientific reality of these invisible chemical gases perfectly mimics the conceptual behavior of an invisible demon.
Because the gas is invisible, it smells like sulfur, which is the classic mythological scent of hell, by the way, and it strikes with violent physical force without any warning.
And when secular science isn't available to explain explosive gas expansion, human psychology requires us to invent a narrative. We have to assign a face and an intent to those chaotic forces. The chemical reaction literally becomes the monster in the dark.
And the scale of this hazard is just mind-boggling. Historians estimate that the population of ancient Rome produced roughly 50,000 kilograms of human excrement every single day.
50,000.
Yeah, 50,000 kilos. And without modern flushing mechanics, these systems frequently backed up and overflowed into the streets.
Which transitions our hazard from chemistry to biology. Because the explosive gases might give you a terrifying burn, but the biological hazards were what decimated the population.
The diseases.
Yes. The diseases born from constant, unavoidable contact with raw sewage. We're looking at rampant outbreaks of typhus, cholera, severe diarrhea, and amoebic dysentery.
Let's talk about dysentery, actually, because that word gets thrown around as, like, a historical joke, mostly from the Oregon Trail game.
Right, yeah.
But amoebic dysentery is caused by a microscopic parasite. You ingest it, usually through contaminated water or fecal matter, and this amoeba travels to your intestines and literally begins eating the lining of your gut.
It's horrific.
It causes severe ulcerations, internal bleeding, and violent fluid loss. It's an excruciating, lethal way to die.
And the archaeological evidence of this suffering is staggering. Paleopathologists studying the backfill from Roman sewers have found an incredibly high concentration of calcified parasite eggs,
Like roundworms and stuff.
roundworms, whipworms, and the traces of dysentery. The Roman populace was thoroughly and continuously infected from the inside out.
Which makes their approach to hygiene genuinely the stuff of nightmares. Because lacking germ theory didn't just make them sick. It actively turned their hygiene practices to biological weapons.
The Xylospongium.
The Xylospongium. It is the perfect example. Break that down for us.
So the Xylospongium was the standard Roman tool for personal cleaning. It was, quite simply, a natural sea sponge affixed to the end of a wooden stick.
But it wasn't a personal item. It was communal.
Utterly communal. You would sit on the public latrine alongside 10 or 20 other people. After finishing, you'd take the shared sponge stick, Use it, maybe rinse it briefly in a shallow channel of slow-moving water at your feet,
Oh, God.
and then drop it back in a bucket of vinegar or salt water for the next person to use.
Which does absolutely nothing to kill an amoeba. You're essentially taking a porous sea sponge, which is the perfect damp environment for bacterial growth, loading it with cholera and dysentery from one person and handing it directly to the next.
It's a direct transmission vector.
The very tool designed to keep them clean was the primary vector of their destruction.
And the psychological terror surrounding these spaces was very real, even if they didn't understand the microbiology. The Roman philosopher Seneca wrote a deeply disturbing account about a gladiator.
I know this story. The visceral horror of it is hard to shake.
It really is.
This gladiator is waiting in the holding cells. He knows he's going to be brutally slaughtered in the amphitheater for entertainment. He's so desperate to escape this fate, and he has no weapons, so he asks to use the latrine. And once inside, he grabs one of these communal Xylospongiums and forcefully shoves the entire stick down his own throat, suffocating himself.
Yeah.
That is how grim the reality of this object was. A man used it to end his own life rather than face the arena.
It perfectly illustrates the bleak reality of these spaces. The latrine was a place of death, whether sudden or prolonged.
But the tragic irony here is almost difficult to process. You have these Romans and later early Christians sitting in these terrifying latrines praying to the heavens to survive.
Seeking divine protection.
Exactly. But the very tool they reach for, that shared sponge, is what's actually killing them. It shows how relying on divine protection leaves you completely blind to the actual physical mechanism of your destruction.
That is the core tension right there between faith and physical reality. Belief systems provided profound psychological comfort.
Sure.
Praying gave a Roman citizen a sense of agency in a space where they otherwise had none. But theological armor offers zero practical efficacy against a microscopic parasite.
Right. A prayer can't sanitize a communal sponge. You can burn all the incense in the world to ward off evil spirits, but if you don't wash your hands with soap, you're going to die of typhus.
Exactly.
And this instinct to invent gods to guard against the latrine didn't start with Christians like Dexionis. The Christians inherited this trauma directly from pagan Roman culture.
They did. The Roman theological response to the latrine was incredibly robust. Long before Christianity, the Romans were actively negotiating with their own pantheon to survive the bathroom.
Okay, tell us about Pompeii, because the archaeology there is wild.
Oh, it's fascinating. Throughout the ruins of Pompeii, archaeologists have uncovered at least 5 separate latrines that feature elaborate shrines to Fortuna.
Fortuna, the goddess of luck. Not a goddess of medicine or healing or hygiene. The goddess of the roll of the dice.
Yes.
That tells you everything you need to know about the ancient survival rate. If you survive a bout of dysentery, it wasn't because of medicine, it was pure luck.
And the iconography surrounding these shrines is striking. In one specific latrine in Pompeii, there's the fresco painted right on the wall. It depicts a man explicitly in the act of defecating, and towering over him is the goddess Fortuna.
And he's flanked by 2 massive snakes, right?
Yes, 2 large snakes. In ancient Mediterranean iconography, snakes were often perceived as fierce protective spirits. They were painted there to physically guard the vulnerable man from unseen forces.
And, just to drive the point home, someone scratched a piece of graffiti into the wall right above this painting. Cacator cave malum. Shitter, beware of evil.
Very direct.
So direct. The Romans might not have had the highly codified demonology that medieval Christianity developed, but this proves they were viscerally terrified of supernatural malice in the cesspit.
And this wasn't isolated to civilian life either. In the ancient port city of Ostia, archaeologists excavated a barracks used by the Roman firefighters.
Of vigils.
Right. These were tough, pragmatic men. But situated right inside their large 20-seater communal latrine was an elaborate shrine. It bears an inscription from a firefighter named Gaius Hilarius Myron, proudly stating that he has, quote, gladly paid his vow to Holy Fortuna.
A firefighter. A guy who literally battles roaring flames for a living still feels the need to make a religious vow to survive a trip to the bathroom.
It puts it in perspective.
It really does. You also see these small terracotta altars found inside private Pompeian toilet. The inhabitants used them to burn incense.
To ward off pollution.
Yeah, the theological justification was that the smoke appeased Fortuna and warded off the evil of the room. But from a secular standpoint, the reality is painfully obvious. They were burning incense because the room smelled like 50,000 kilos of fermenting human waste and lethal hydrogen sulfide gas.
Which is why the dual purpose of religious ritual is always a fascinating study. The incense provides a very real physical utility by masking the literal stench, while the theological act of burning it theoretically masks the spiritual pollution.
It solves both problems.
Exactly. It attempts to solve the physical discomfort and the psychological terror simultaneously.
Which sets up one of the most intellectually hypocritical moments in history. Fast forward to the 3rd century, and you have this prominent Christian theologian named Clement.
Oh, Clement's critique.
Yeah, Clement writes this scathing, sarcastic critique of the pagan Romans. He basically says, look at how absurd these pagans are. They claim Fortuna is their most powerful deity, and yet they drag her statue into the latrine and turn a toilet into her temple.
He's utilizing the absolute filth of the latrine as a rhetorical weapon to demonstrate the perceived degradation of the pagan belief system.
But the hypocrisy is staggering. Clement is laughing at them, but what does his own religion do just 2 centuries later with Dexionis the priest?
They do the exact same thing.
Yes, they just replace the Roman goddess of luck with Christian saints like Saint Thecla. From a secular point of view, both religions are doing the exact same thing. They are throwing theology at a plumbing problem.
It's a brilliant parallel. Whether it's Fortuna or a Christian saint, the human mind craves a negotiation with the divine when faced with random, senseless suffering.
Because if a loved one dies of cholera, you desperately want to believe there was a cosmic reason. A demon struck them down, or they didn't offer enough incense to Fortuna.
Right.
Because the secular alternative, that an invisible, mindless, microscopic amoeba from a shared sea sponge just happened to enter their body by pure chance, is existentially terrifying. It removes all human agency.
Precisely. Appealing to Fortuna, literally the concept of luck, perfectly encapsulates how random survival felt before modern plumbing. When you don't know why the person to your left dies of typhus while you survive, survival is just a roll of the dice. So you pray to the one who controls the dice.
It's an incredible journey to trace. We've gone from these pitch-black, explosive, god-haunted latrines of the ancient world filled with invisible lethal gases and microscopic parasites, all the way to the secular engineered safety of today.
And that contrast is a profound testament to the triumph of the scientific method. We methodically identified the unseen threats, the methane, the amoebas, and we engineered physical solutions.
Less curves instead of snakes.
Exactly. We replaced terracotta altars with water treatment facilities.
And I want to bring this right back to you, the listener. Because when you sit on your modern porcelain throne, protected by an S-curved pipe and sanitation plants, you are directly benefiting from the triumph of secular science over ancient supernatural terror. You don't need Fortuna because you have plumbing. We successfully replaced toilet demons and goddesses of luck with germ theory and S-curve pipes. But it leaves me with this final lingering question for you to ponder. What invisible, terrifying forces in our modern lives are we currently explaining away with our own versions of demons or luck, simply because we don't yet have the science to fully understand them?